The courtroom cameras captured the exact moment when supreme confidence transformed into pure terror. Karen Stevens, a 42-year-old professional victim with perfectly styled blonde hair and a medical neck brace that cost more than most people's monthly rent, strutted into Judge Judy's courtroom like she owned the place. Her entrance was a masterclass in theatrical performance. Every step was calculated, every move perfectly timed, every pained expression rehearsed in front of a mirror for maximum sympathy. She clutched a thick folder of medical documents in one hand while the other rested dramatically on her lower back, suggesting injuries so severe that simply walking was an act of heroic courage. What Karen didn't know was that within 4 seconds of opening her mouth, Judge Judy would catch a lie so obvious, so devastating that it would expose the biggest insurance fraud scheme in the show's 25-year history. That frozen moment of realization when Karen's face transformed from smug confidence to absolute horror would become the most viral courtroom clip ever recorded, shared over 15 million times and forever, proving that you cannot fool America's greatest human lie detector. Karen had walked into that courtroom believing she had already won. After all, this was her 4th personal injury lawsuit in 5 years, and the previous 3 had been wildly successful money-making ventures. A shopping cart bump that somehow resulted in chronic back pain had netted her $18,000. A slip and fall at a restaurant, despite security footage showing no actual fall, had brought in $22,000. A supposedly defective door that injured her shoulder had settled for $15,000. She had perfected the art of exploiting the legal system, targeting small business owners who couldn't afford lengthy court battles and insurance companies that found it cheaper to settle than to fight. Each time she had walked away richer while her victims suffered financial devastation and emotional trauma. Today was supposed to be her biggest payday yet, $50,000 from an elderly grocery store owner for severe whiplash from what police reports described as the gentlest parking lot tap in recorded history. She had her medical records, her witness statements from her sister who conveniently saw everything, and her perfectly practiced testimony about unbearable pain and permanent disability. The defendant, Robert Chen, sat trembling in his chair, looking every bit like the victim he actually was. At 73 years old, this kind immigrant had spent 4 decades building his small neighborhood grocery store from nothing. He had arrived in America with $17 in his pocket and a dream of providing for his family through honest hard work. Every dollar he earned went back into his business and his community. He employed local teenagers, gave credit to families struggling between paychecks, and donated unsold food to homeless shelters. His store wasn't just a business, it was a community cornerstone where neighbors gathered, where elderly residents could shop without traveling far, where everyone knew his name and trusted his character. Now, at an age when he should have been enjoying retirement with his grandchildren, he faced complete financial ruin because a woman had backed into his parked car at approximately 2 miles per hour and then decided to turn that minor incident into a jackpot lawsuit. The incident itself was almost comically insignificant. Security footage from Robert's own parking lot showed the entire encounter with crystal clarity. Karen's SUV had reversed slowly into Robert's parked sedan, with barely enough force to leave a scratch. The impact was so minimal that Robert, who had been loading groceries into his trunk, didn't even feel it. Karen had immediately jumped out of her vehicle, and here's where the footage became interesting. She had walked perfectly normally around both vehicles, inspecting for damage, showing no signs of pain or distress whatsoever. She had bent down to examine the bumpers, turned her head in all directions to look at different angles, and gestured animatedly while speaking to Robert. Then, after exchanging insurance information and driving away without incident, she returned 20 minutes later with a completely different demeanor. Suddenly she was limping, wincing, clutching her neck, and demanding that Robert call an ambulance immediately. What Robert didn't know at the time was that those 20 minutes had been spent calling her lawyer, rehearsing her injury story, and preparing for what she thought would be an easy settlement. What Karen didn't know was that Robert's security system was far more sophisticated than she had assumed, capturing not just the collision, but her entire performance before and after. And what neither of them knew was that Judge Judy had spent the previous evening reviewing every frame of that footage, making notes, spotting inconsistencies, and preparing to dismantle Karen's fraud with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a prosecutor who had seen this con game 1,000 times before. The courtroom atmosphere was electric with anticipation as Karen Stevens prepared to deliver what she believed would be an Oscar-worthy performance. She had positioned herself carefully in the plaintiff's chair, adjusting her neck brace for maximum visibility to the cameras. Her lawyer, a tired-looking man named Gerald Mitchell who specialized in personal injury cases, sat beside her with the resigned expression of someone who had heard this same story too many times. Karen placed her tissue box within easy reach, set her water bottle at the perfect angle for dramatic sips during emotional moments, and arranged her medical folder so that its impressive thickness would be visible to everyone in the courtroom. She had practiced this routine so many times that every movement was automatic, every gesture designed to communicate suffering and vulnerability. The audience members watched with varying degrees of sympathy and skepticism, but Karen only cared about one person in that room. Judge Judy Schindlin sat behind her bench with an expression of complete neutrality, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on Karen with the intensity of a predator studying prey. Judge Judy had already made her assessment before Karen even opened her mouth. In 25 years of presiding over tens of thousands of cases, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to spot liars, frauds, and scam artists within the first 30 seconds of meeting them. Karen Stevens had triggered every single alarm bell the moment she walked through those courtroom doors. The overly dramatic limp that somehow got worse when she thought people were watching. The neck brace that looked brand new despite supposedly being worn for months. The way her eyes darted around the room, calculating who was buying her performance. The slight smirk that appeared when she thought no one was looking. But Judge Judy wasn't just relying on instinct. She had spent hours reviewing the case file, the security footage, the medical records, and most importantly, Karen's history. She had discovered a pattern that would make any prosecutor salivate. What Karen thought was her secret weapon, her medical documentation and witness statements, was actually going to become the rope she would hang herself with. Judge Judy just needed to give her enough room to do it. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Judy began with her signature no-nonsense approach. Her voice cut through the courtroom air like a scalpel, clear and commanding. "Miss Stevens, you're suing Mr. Chen for $50,000, claiming you suffered severe whiplash and a permanent neck injury from a collision in a parking lot. Tell me exactly what happened at the moment of impact." It was a deceptively simple question, the kind Judge Judy had asked thousands of times before. But this question was actually a carefully constructed trap, and Karen was about to walk right into it with the confidence of someone who had no idea they were being hunted. Karen took a deep breath, touched her neck brace gently as if even that small movement caused pain, and began her rehearsed testimony. "Your Honor, I was sitting in my car, completely stopped, minding my own business, when suddenly..." And this was where everything fell apart. To emphasize the sudden violence of the impact, Karen threw both arms dramatically above her head in a sweeping gesture. Her hands stretched toward the ceiling to demonstrate how the collision had supposedly jolted her body forward and back. It was a natural instinct, the kind of physical demonstration people make without thinking when describing a shocking event. But the moment her arms reached their full extension above her head, with her neck rotating smoothly to look upward at her own hands, reality crashed down on her like a physical force. Judge Judy's face remained completely still, but one eyebrow raised slowly, deliberately, like a drawbridge ascending to reveal the truth behind the facade. The silence that followed was deafening. 4 seconds had passed since Karen began speaking. 4 seconds that would destroy her entire case, expose years of fraud, and turn her into one of the most hated people on the internet. Karen's arms froze in midair, her hands still stretched toward the ceiling, her neck fully extended in a position that her medical records claimed was completely impossible. Her face underwent a transformation that the cameras captured in excruciating detail. The confident, practiced expression of a victim recounting trauma melted away like wax near a flame. Confusion flashed across her features as her brain registered what her body had just done. Then came the horrifying realization as she understood that everyone in the courtroom, including Judge Judy, had just witnessed her completely mobile neck moving freely through a range of motion that she had sworn under oath was medically impossible. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and for 8 full seconds that felt like an eternity, she simply stood there frozen with her arms above her head like a cartoon character who had just run off a cliff and hadn't yet looked down. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the camera operators breathing. Even the stenographer had stopped typing. her fingers hovering over the keys as she watched this spectacular self-destruction unfold in real time. Karen's hands slowly lowered from their elevated position like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her brain was working frantically to construct some explanation, any explanation that could undo what had just happened. But the damage was already done, captured on multiple cameras from different angles, witnessed by everyone in the courtroom, and most importantly observed by Judge Judy, whose expression had shifted from neutral observation to barely concealed satisfaction. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out, and when they finally did, they tumbled forth in a stammering mess of half-formed excuses. I mean, that is, well, the physical therapy has helped some. Not completely, of course, but some movement has returned. My doctor said that occasional range of motion is possible, but it's extremely painful and I shouldn't do it. I forgot myself for a moment because I was so caught up in describing the trauma of that terrible accident. Her voice grew quieter with each word as she realized that every syllable was digging her grave deeper. Judge Judy let the silence hang in the air for a few seconds, allowing Karen's pathetic explanation to echo through the courtroom and reveal itself for the desperate lie it was. Then she leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Karen's face, and spoke with the cold precision that had made her a legend. I see your neck can't turn more than 2 inches in any direction according to your medical records. You claim you cannot look up, down, or side to side without excruciating pain. You've testified that you require a neck brace at all times, and that any sudden movement could cause permanent damage. But apparently, when you're enthusiastically describing an accident, you can throw your arms above your head and crane your neck back like you're watching fireworks on the 4th of July. That's very interesting, Miss Stevens. Very interesting indeed. The courtroom audience murmured with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. Several people actually laughed, quickly stifling themselves when the bailiff gave them a warning look. Karen's lawyer, Gerald Mitchell, had his head in his hands. He had suspected this case might be problematic, but watching his client literally demonstrate her own fraud within the first minute of testimony was a new low. Even for his depressing career, Judge Judy was just getting started. She opened a folder on her bench and pulled out several printed frames from the security footage that Robert Chen had provided. Ms. Stevens, I've reviewed the parking lot security footage from Mr. Chen's grocery store very carefully, multiple times. In fact, I found it absolutely fascinating. Would you like to know what I found so fascinating about it? Karen's face had gone pale, but she managed a weak nod. Judge Judy held up the first image. This frame was taken at exactly 2:47 p.m., the moment of impact. As you can see, the contact between your vehicle and Mr. Chen's parked car was so minimal that neither vehicle moved more than an inch. The impact was equivalent to someone tapping you on the shoulder to get your attention. But let's move forward, shall we? She held up a second image. This frame was taken 30 seconds after the collision. Here you are, Miss Stevens, walking around both vehicles with perfect posture. No limping, no holding your neck, no signs of distress whatsoever. A third image joined the display. This frame shows you bending completely forward at the waist to examine the bumper damage. Your neck is bent at approximately 60 degrees, which, according to your medical expert, is impossible given your claimed injuries. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice rising in pitch with desperation. Your Honor, the pain didn't start immediately. Sometimes whiplash symptoms take hours or even days to appear. That's medically documented. My doctor can explain. Judge Judy cut her off with a raised hand, her voice sharp as broken glass. I'm not finished, Miss Stevens. Please don't interrupt me again. The authority in her tone made Karen shrink back in her chair. Judge Judy continued, pulling out more images. Here's a particularly interesting sequence. At 2:52 p.m., 5 minutes after this supposedly devastating collision, we see you turning your head a full 180 degrees to yell something at Mr. Chen. Your mouth is open. Your neck is fully rotated to the left, and I can even see the tendons in your neck standing out from the force of whatever you were shouting. Then at 2:54 p.m., you bend down to pick up your cell phone that you dropped. You squat completely down, retrieve the phone, and stand back up without using your hands for support. For someone claiming permanent cervical damage, you move remarkably well when you think no one important is watching. The evidence was devastating, but Judge Judy had saved her knockout punch for last. She pulled out a thick document and held it up for the courtroom to see. Now, Miss Stevens, let's talk about your medical history. Specifically, let's talk about your personal injury claim history. This isn't your first rodeo, is it? Karen's face transformed from pale to completely ashen. Her hand started trembling and she reached for her water bottle with shaking fingers, nearly knocking it over in her panic. Judge Judy's question hung in the air like an executioner's blade waiting to fall. Karen Stevens sat frozen in her chair, her trembling hands wrapped around her water bottle, her eyes darting desperately between her lawyer and the exit, as if she were calculating whether she could simply run away from this nightmare. But there was no escape from Judge Judy's courtroom, and certainly no escape from the truth that was about to be revealed to millions of viewers. Karen's lawyer, Gerald Mitchell, looked like a man who had just realized he had been played for a fool. He leaned away from his client slightly, as if physical distance might somehow protect him from the legal disaster that was unfolding. The audience leaned forward collectively, sensing that something massive was about to be exposed. Judge Judy let the tension build for another few seconds before continuing, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Let me answer my own question. Miss Stevens, since you seem to have lost the ability to speak. No, this is not your first personal injury lawsuit. In fact, you've become quite the professional victim over the past 5 years. Judge Judy opened the thick document and began reading with the clinical precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. In October 2019, you filed a personal injury claim against Save-A-Mart supermarket, alleging that a shopping cart was pushed into you by an employee, causing severe lower back injuries. You claimed you couldn't sit for more than 20 minutes without excruciating pain. You claimed you needed special ergonomic furniture and ongoing chiropractic treatment. The case settled out of court for $18,000. Karen tried to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. That was a real injury. I was hurt, the doctor said. Judge Judy's hand shot up, silencing her immediately. I'm not asking you questions right now, Miss Stevens. I'm telling you what I know. Please sit quietly and listen. The rebuke was so sharp that Karen physically flinched. Judge Judy continued, her voice growing harder with each revelation. In March 2021, you sued Bella Italy restaurant for $25,000, claiming you slipped on a wet floor and injured your neck and shoulder. Interestingly, the security footage from that incident, which I've also reviewed, shows no actual fall. You're seen walking normally through the restaurant, then suddenly, you're on the floor calling for help. The restaurant owner, a single mother supporting 3 children, couldn't afford a lengthy legal battle. She settled for $22,000 and had to close her business 6 months later due to increased insurance premiums. The courtroom erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. The audience was beginning to understand that they weren't watching a simple personal injury case. They were witnessing the exposure of a serial predator who had been destroying innocent people's lives for profit. Robert Chin, who had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings, began to cry softly as he realized he wasn't alone, that there were other victims just like him who had been targeted by this woman's calculated cruelty. Judge Judy wasn't finished. In August 2022, you filed another lawsuit, this time against Henderson Hardware Store, claiming a defective automatic door closed on you and injured your shoulder, requiring surgery and months of physical therapy. The store owner, a 78-year-old veteran who had run that hardware store for 40 years, paid you $15,000 to make you go away. He died of a heart attack 3 months later. His family believes the stress of your lawsuit contributed to his death. The last revelation hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Several audience members audibly gasped. One woman in the back row stood up and pointed at Karen, shouting, "You should be in jail," before the bailiff gently asked her to sit down. Karen's carefully constructed facade had completely crumbled. Tears were streaming down her face, but these weren't the practiced tears of a professional victim. They were tears of genuine panic, the kind that come when someone realizes their entire house of cards is collapsing and there's nothing they can do to stop it. She pulled at her neck brace frantically, as if the prop that had served her so well in previous scams had suddenly become a noose tightening around her throat. Her lawyer had physically pushed his chair away from her, creating visible distance between himself and his disgraced client. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her expression a mixture of disgust and grim satisfaction. But wait, there's more, Miss Stevens. Because I don't just read case files. I do real investigation. I had my team pull your medical records from all 4 of your injury claims. And do you know what we discovered? Every single medical report supporting your injuries came from the same doctor. Dr. Marcus Webb of Webb Medical Associates. She paused for a moment, letting the name hang in the air. Now I found that quite interesting, so I made some calls. Dr. Webb is currently under investigation by the State Medical Board for providing fraudulent medical documentation to support insurance claims. He's been doing this for years, running what amounts to a medical fraud mill where people like you pay him to create whatever diagnosis you need to support your lawsuits. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This wasn't just one woman filing fraudulent lawsuits. This was an organized conspiracy involving medical professionals, a systematic scheme to defraud insurance companies and destroy small business owners. Judge Judy pulled out another set of documents, and Karen visibly shrank in her chair as if trying to disappear. But here's my favorite part, Judge Judy continued. Miss Stevens, while you've been claiming total disability, unable to work, suffering constant pain that prevents normal activities, my private investigator has been following you. And boy, did he get some interesting footage? Judge Judy held up several printed photographs like a poker player revealing a royal flush. This photo was taken last Tuesday at Fitness World Gym. That's you, Miss Stevens, in a yoga class executing a perfect upward dog pose. Your neck is fully extended backward, supporting your body weight. For someone who claims they can't turn their neck more than 2 inches, you're remarkably flexible. She held up another photo. This one was taken Thursday at Riverside Shopping Mall. That's you carrying 6 heavy shopping bags, 2 in each hand and 2 more over your shoulders. No neck brace, no signs of pain, walking with perfect posture, and moving your head freely in all directions as you window shopped. A third photo joined the evidence pile, and this gem was taken Saturday at Lincoln Park during your son's baseball game. That's you turning your head rapidly back and forth to follow the ball, jumping up and down, celebrating a home run, and hugging other parents with enough force to lift one of them completely off the ground. All of this occurred during the same week you filed sworn statements, claiming you couldn't perform basic daily activities without assistance. Karen Stevens had no defense left, no explanations that could possibly undo the mountain of evidence Judge Judy had systematically laid out before the entire courtroom and millions of television viewers. Her body language had completely transformed from the confident, suffering victim who had walked in 40 minutes earlier to a hunched, defeated woman whose entire world was crashing down around her. With shaking hands, she reached up and ripped the neck brace off completely, throwing it onto the table in front of her in a gesture of frustration and surrender. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. The prop that had been central to her fraud, the physical embodiment of her lies, was now just a piece of foam and plastic sitting uselessly on a table. Her face was blotchy and red from crying. Her carefully applied makeup streaked down her cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was nothing like the confident, articulate woman who had begun her testimony. Now she sounded desperate, cornered, and utterly broken. Your Honor, please, you don't understand. Those other cases were real. I was really hurt. Maybe this one got exaggerated a little bit, but I needed the money. My family is struggling. My husband lost his job. We have bills piling up. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just needed help. And the insurance companies have so much money, and these businesses all have insurance anyway, so nobody really gets hurt. The words tumbled out in a frantic stream, each excuse contradicting the last, each justification exposing more of the warped reasoning she had used to rationalize destroying innocent lives for profit. Judge Judy cut her off, her voice sharp and cold. Stop talking, Miss Stevens. Every word that comes out of your mouth is making this worse for you. You just admitted under oath that you exaggerated this case. You just confessed to insurance fraud on national television. Do you understand what you've done? Karen's eyes widened as the realization of her confession hit her. Her lawyer dropped his pen and covered his face with both hands in despair. Judge Judy leaned forward, her tone carrying the full weight of her authority and decades of courtroom experience. Miss Stevens, you are not a victim. You are a predator. You target hard-working people who have spent their lives building something meaningful, and you destroy them for pocket change. Robert Chen worked for 40 years to build his grocery store. He employs people from his community. He gives credit to struggling families. He donates food to shelters. And you tried to bankrupt him over a parking lot tap that caused 0 damage to either vehicle. That restaurant owner who settled with you, she lost everything. Her business closed. Her dream died, Her children watched their mother cry herself to sleep at night because of you. And that hardware store owner, his family believes the stress of fighting your fraudulent lawsuit contributed to his death. These aren't faceless corporations. These are real people whose lives you've devastated without a single moment of genuine remorse. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the sound of Karen's sobbing. Judge Judy picked up her gavel but didn't strike it yet. She had more to say, and every word was going to count. Here is my ruling. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Not only do you get nothing, Miss Stevens, but you are going to pay Mr. Chen's legal fees, which amount to $8,500. But that's just the beginning of your problems. I am forwarding the complete transcript of this case, along with all evidence presented here today, to the District Attorney's Office. You will be facing criminal charges for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and perjury for lying under oath in this courtroom. Given the pattern of behavior over multiple years and multiple victims, you're looking at serious prison time. 2 to 5 years is the standard sentence for serial fraud of this nature. Karen let out a wail of despair that echoed through the courtroom. She reached toward Judge Judy with both hands, physically begging for mercy. Please, Your Honor, please. I have children. I can't go to prison. I'll pay back the money. I'll admit everything. Please don't send this to the prosecutor. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never do this again. I swear. Judge Judy's expression didn't soften even slightly. You should have thought about your children before you became a career criminal, Miss Stevens. You should have thought about them before you destroyed other people's families for profit. Your children deserve a mother who teaches them integrity and honesty, not one who shows them that lying and fraud are acceptable ways to make money. Maybe prison will give you time to reflect on the kind of example you've been setting. She then turned her attention to Robert Chen, her voice softening. Mr. Chen, I want to apologize on behalf of our legal system that allowed this woman to torment you for months. You did nothing wrong. The collision was so minor it barely qualifies as an accident. You've conducted yourself with dignity and grace throughout this ordeal. Your community is lucky to have you, and I hope this judgment brings you some peace. Robert stood slowly, tears streaming down his weathered face, and bowed deeply to Judge Judy in gratitude. The courtroom erupted in applause, and for once, Judge Judy allowed it to continue for several seconds before gaveling for order. The final strike of the gavel echoed through the courtroom like a period at the end of a sentence. Karen was escorted out by the bailiff, her sobs still audible as she disappeared through the exit. Her lawyer gathered his papers in defeated silence, already bracing for the inevitable state bar investigation that would follow his involvement in this disaster. Robert Chen was soon surrounded by supporters and well-wishers, people who had watched the proceedings and wanted to shake his hand and tell him how proud they were of his courage to fight. Back the footage of Karen's frozen moment, arms raised above her head, clearly showing full mobility of her supposedly injured neck, was uploaded to social media within minutes of the episode airing. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 15 million times across all platforms. The hashtag Judge Judy Carter trended #1 worldwide. Thousands of comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences with fraudulent injury claims, celebrating that justice had finally been served in such spectacular fashion. Legal commentators and personal injury attorneys appeared on news programs, many calling it the most clear-cut case of insurance fraud exposure in television history. The real-world consequences for Karen Stevens extended far beyond the courtroom. The district attorney filed formal charges within a week, citing the televised testimony as primary evidence. Dr. Marcus Webb, the physician who had supplied fraudulent medical documentation for all 4 of Karen's injury claims, had his medical license suspended pending investigation. His patient files were subpoenaed, uncovering a network of fraudulent claims involving 23 other individuals over a 5-year period. Insurance companies launched a coordinated investigation into the fraud ring, ultimately recovering over $2 million in fraudulent settlements. Karen's previous victims, including the family of the deceased hardware store owner, began filing civil suits to recover their losses, plus additional damages. The restaurant owner, who had been forced to close her business, was able to reopen after a community fundraising campaign, raised enough money to cover her startup costs. 9 other defendants who had settled with Karen were granted case reversals and refunds of their settlement payments. Robert Chen became a local hero after the episode aired. His grocery store saw a massive increase in business as people from across the city came to support him. A GoFundMe campaign started by loyal customers raised $95,000 to help cover his legal expenses and compensate for months of stress and lost revenue from dealing with the lawsuit. Robert used part of the money to establish a legal defense fund for other small business owners facing fraudulent injury claims. 3 months after the episode aired, Karen Stevens pleaded guilty to 4 counts of insurance fraud, 1 count of conspiracy, and 1 count of perjury to avoid a lengthy trial. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay $180,000 in restitution to her victims. During her sentencing hearing, she read a prepared statement apologizing for her actions. But even the judge presiding over her criminal case noted that her remorse seemed performative rather than genuine, much like her injury claims had been. The case became a landmark moment in television history, studied by law students as an example of how quickly and completely a fraudulent case can unravel when confronted with proper investigation and a judge who refuses to be fooled. Judge Judy's methodical destruction of Karen's lies, her preparation and research, and her willingness to go beyond the surface claims to uncover a pattern of criminal behavior became a masterclass in legal procedure and critical thinking. The 4-second moment when Karen demonstrated her perfectly functional neck while claiming total disability became shorthand in legal circles for obvious self-implication. The moment when a witness destroys their own credibility so completely that no further questioning is necessary. Insurance companies began implementing stricter verification procedures for personal injury claims, specifically citing the Judge Judy case as an example of red flags that should trigger deeper investigation. Medical boards increased oversight of physicians providing injury documentation, making it significantly harder for fraud mills like Dr. Webb's practice to operate. The moral of Karen Stevens' spectacular downfall resonated far beyond the courtroom. It reminded viewers that truth always has a way of revealing itself, especially when it encounters someone with the intelligence, preparation, and authority to expose it. Karen had spent years believing she was smarter than the system, that she could manipulate emotions and exploit sympathy to profit from other people's hard work. She had convinced herself that insurance companies were faceless entities, and that small business owners could afford to lose because they had coverage. She had rationalized her fraud by claiming financial need, as if being in debt somehow justified destroying other families who were also struggling. But in the end, all her rationalizations, all her rehearsed performances, and all her fraudulent documentation couldn't stand up to 4 seconds of honest scrutiny. One unconscious gesture, one natural movement made without thinking, had exposed years of lies and destroyed the facade she had so carefully constructed. Smash that subscribe button if you believe that justice still matters and that liars always get caught eventually. Comment below with AI if you think Judge Judy is the greatest lie detector of all time. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that truth always wins and that trying to cheat the system will eventually result in consequences far worse than any temporary financial struggle. Because at the end of the day, Karen Stevens learned the hardest possible lesson. When you build your life on lies, it only takes 4 seconds of truth to bring the whole thing crashing down.